Have you ever really stopped to think about it? It's one of the most incredible transformations any of us ever go through. We start out as these little newborns who can really only cry, eat, and sleep, but then in just a handful of years, we become these sophisticated little conversationalists. So let's dive into this absolute miracle of language.
I mean, just listen to this. This isn't from some movie script. This is a real thing a 4.5-year-old actually said. Think about everything that's packed in there. You've got memory, you've got planning for the future, negotiation, even some pretty complex sentences. This is the amazing place we end up.
And that really is the big mystery, isn't it? How do we go from just crying to, bargaining about nap times and planning to make pudding? What on earth is happening inside that little brain during those first few years that lets this explosion of language happen?
Well, as much as it feels like it, the answer isn't actually magic. It really all comes down to the baby's brain, which is basically a superpowered pattern-finding machine. It's just constantly listening, tracking, and analyzing all the language that's happening around it, what scientists call the ambient language, and it uses those patterns to build its own grammar from scratch.
So, where does a journey like this even begin? Well, you might be surprised to hear that it starts way earlier than a baby's first cry. It actually begins in the quiet, muffled world of the womb.
This timeline is just wild. By about 7 months into a pregnancy, a fetus can already hear sounds from the outside world. And just a month later, they're not just hearing things, they're recognizing them. Their little heart rate actually perks up more for their parent's voice than for a total stranger's. So get this, by the time they're born, they've already learned the unique rhythm and melody of their native language. They can actually tell it apart from a language they've never heard before. Amazing.
Okay, fair enough. That's a great question. You can't exactly ask a newborn what they know, right? You can't give them a pop quiz. So how in the world do scientists figure out what's going on inside that tiny little head?
Well, they use some really clever tricks. One of the classic ones is called the high-amplitude sucking method. And the idea behind it is actually pretty simple but totally brilliant. When a baby is interested in something new, they suck harder on their pacifier. Researchers use that completely involuntary reaction as a direct window into what a baby is perceiving.
So here's how it plays out. First, the researchers play a sound, maybe a sentence in French. The baby's interested, so their sucking rate shoots up. Then, they just keep playing it until the baby gets bored and the sucking slows way down. This is called habituation. Then comes the test. They switch the sound to a sentence in, say, Russian. If that sucking rate jumps right back up, bingo, you know the baby heard a difference. And yep, that's exactly what they found.
Okay, so babies are born already knowing something about the rhythm of their language. But what about all the specific sounds? Well, that brings us to the next critical phase, where their brain starts to specialize and really tune in to the nitty-gritty details.
When we're born, we are basically citizens of the world, at least linguistically. A baby's brain comes ready to tell the difference between almost all the sounds that exist in all human languages. Doesn't matter if it's English or Hindi or Nwepkep Maxine. They are true universal listeners.
But this incredible superpower doesn't last forever. Check out this chart. It shows a process called perceptual narrowing. In a famous study, 6-month-old babies from English-speaking homes were fantastic at telling the difference between sounds used in Hindi. But by the time they were 1 year old, whoa, look at that drop. Their success rate just plummets. Their brains have figured out which sound contrasts matter for English and have started to ignore the ones that don't. And that's not a bad thing. It's a crucial step toward becoming an expert in your own language.
And get this, it's not just about spoken sounds. The exact same thing happens for babies learning sign languages. They start out being able to see tiny differences between hand shapes from any sign language. But by age 1, they've specialized in the ones used in the language they see every day. So what this really means is that by their very first birthday, a baby's brain has already built the basic sound or sign system for their native language.
All right, so we've talked a ton about what babies are taking in. But how does that turn into what they can actually produce? This is where we move from perception to those first babbles, and pretty soon, those first amazing words.
It's so easy to just dismiss babbling as cute baby noise, right? But it's actually incredibly important work. Babbling isn't random, it's structured practice. It's those repeated syllables, like ba ba ba, that are exercising the brain's grammar and the physical motor skills needed for speech. And babies learning sign language do the same thing with their hands. A first word, though, that's different. That's when a form, like baba, gets tied to a specific meaning, like bottle. That's the huge leap from just practice to real communication. Okay, so that jump to single words is massive. But the next step is, honestly, even more mind-boggling. How do kids learn to put words together? How do they crack the code of grammar?
So here's a secret that every parent of a toddler already knows. They understand so much more than they can actually say. Their understanding of syntax, the rules for building sentences, just skyrockets way before their ability to speak catches up. They're hiding this incredibly rich grammatical knowledge. And experiments prove this in some amazing ways. Take this one. Researchers showed 14-month-olds some toys and used a made-up word. If they heard it in a noun frame, like, "these are blickets," they figured blicket was a category, like an animal. But if they heard it in an adjective frame, "these are blickish," they guessed it was a property, like pink. They're using the grammar of the sentence to figure out what the word means at 14 months old. Just incredible.
And this skill just keeps getting more sophisticated. By the time they're 2, they can do the same thing with verbs. Hearing a made-up verb like mooping in a sentence like, "The lady is mooping my brother," makes them think something totally different than if they hear, "The lady and my brother are mooping." They are already masters at using sentence structure to decode meaning.
Now, all of this learning, from sounds to sentences, it doesn't happen in the vacuum. It all depends on one huge factor, the language environment. So let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture of how a child's world shapes their language. You might have heard of this number before, 30 million. It comes from the 30 million word gap, which was this really famous, really influential idea that by age 3, children from lower income families had heard 30 million fewer words than kids from wealthier families.
But this is such a classic case of why it matters how we measure things. See, the original study from 1995 only counted words spoken by the mother directly to the child. But in 2018, a new study looked again, only this time they counted words from everybody: dads, grandparents, older siblings, and all the other speech the child was overhearing. And what happened? The gap completely disappeared. In fact, some of the low-income homes actually had a word advantage.
So the big takeaway here is that a child's language environment is way more complex than just one person talking to them. And the choices scientists make, like who to listen to and what to count, can sometimes lead to conclusions that are biased and don't really capture the rich reality of a lot of kids' homes.
And speaking of rich language environments, what about homes where there's more than one language? For years, people worried that being bilingual might confuse kids or slow them down, but all the evidence points in the exact opposite direction. Far from being harmful, it comes with a whole bunch of cognitive and social perks, from better problem-solving skills to being more socially aware. It's a huge asset, and it helps maintain those priceless connections to family and culture.
So we've seen this incredible journey, from the womb to babbling to cracking the code of grammar. Every healthy baby on this planet is born with the same fundamental ability, the potential to learn whatever human language they're exposed to, whether it's spoken or signed. And that just leaves us with one final thing to think about. What does this universal biological blueprint for connection really tell us about what it means to be human?